There's a very famous book out by Peter Attia known as Outlive, and I've been very enamored with it lately. Essentially what we have here is this idea of longevity, but not only longevity for longevity's sake, but also in quality of longevity. So if I compare it to a health example, a lot of people retire at 60 years old and a lot of people live to 90, but a lot of folks don't have the same quality of life at 90 that they do at 60. And I know that there's a lot of things that are out of control with our health, but today I kind of want to adopt that over for the financial mindset, more specifically for your retirement. Let's get right into the list. Just kidding, I have to give the disclosure, of course, that all of this is for financial education. I simply want you to have a more clear mind on your finances heading into retirement. Of course, if you ever have any questions on any of these things, please feel free to reach out to me, but these could be great for a conversation with your financial advisor. But just know this is financial education. These are not investment pieces of advice or financial recommendations, so be very mindful. Now, let's move on from that and let's get into the first one, and it's the most obvious one, and that's going to be inflation. So I made this chart here and I grabbed all this data from CPI, which simply just measures inflation over time. I went back to 1990 and I said, what is $1 and what is its worth as we go throughout the decades? And as you can see here, we are very far off from $1 in 1990 here in 2025. I'm sure that this may not at all be surprising to you. Every time you go to the grocery store, it feels like something was more expensive than the week before. And if you even think back to even 4 years ago, I think in terms of how long a president has been in office, things have even gotten more expensive since then. You might know better than I do, but I don't think inflation is going anywhere but up. If it does anything, a lot of times it just remains the same and continues to increase by whatever we're at today, which is roughly around 3%. So all of that to say, inflation is traditionally the number one reason why someone falls behind or has a lower quality of financial life in retirement. There's going to be a point later, point number 7 specifically, that is related to this, but just know that this is probably going to be the most common point and probably the most labored point for you if you're someone that reads into these things, so I won't stick on it too long. So number 2, like number 1, is something that you really don't have control over, and that's going to be sequence of returns risk. If you're not familiar with this, with what this is essentially retiring and having the market drop out from under your feet right at the start of your retirement. And if you think of the great financial crisis in 2008, if you think about COVID in 2019, retirement represents sort of the beginning of a race for someone, and they're drawing from their retirement accounts. Ideally, of course, Social Security and any pensions and any fixed income would cover them for their living expenses, and we can have the opportunity to hold off on withdrawing from retirement accounts, but that's not the case for everyone. And that's where sequence of return risks really poses some serious threats to longevity in financial health in retirement. But one thing I want to point out to you, and this is something that always concerns me when we talk about having major losses early on in retirement. If I were to tell you today that you're going to lose 50% of your portfolio over the next 2 or 3 months, how much do I need to make back in order to even get back even with where I was at? Now, me and my earlier self would have for sure said 50%, oh, easy. But a lot of you out there are probably better at math than I, and you said 100%, right? So if you lose 50% of your money, you have to make 100% to get back. And I grabbed that number 50% because this is what happened in 2008, right? And of course the market recovered and it's done very well since then. But this is a very real case study, and it's possible. So I'll do a video a little bit later on sequence of return risk. There's also probably other great planners here on YouTube that have discussed sequence of return risk, but there's a number of ways to plan for it. But just be mindful that this could cause a serious risk to your retirement longevity. So the third, in keeping with things that you really can't control, or if you ask Peter Attia actually from the book Outlive, maybe you can't control this one. This is going to be a health-related event or healthcare and just health risks in retirement. So a lot of folks do have what's known as a long-term care event pop up in retirement. This is having something, of course, happening to them or their spouse that requires thousands and thousands of dollars in retirement to keep them in a home or to keep them in a hospital. Of course, ideally, you have Medicare, you have a lot of health insurance plans that you have in retirement, but that's not to say that this won't put you back several $1,000s in retirement. So that's the third thing. Okay, so now let's move on to some things that you have a little bit more control over in retirement. And the first of those, so number 4 here, is going to be tax inefficiencies. And this is really, that's a fancy word to just say where you're holding your assets at, right? So if I think about the most tax efficient accounts, traditionally after tax, so tax-free accounts like a Roth IRA or like a Roth 401k would be considered the most tax efficient in retirement because when I pull the money out, 1, I'm not taxed on it, and 2, it doesn't add to my taxable income, right? So, if everyone had a Roth IRA and lots of it, they'd be much happier for it, but we live in real life, so we have to be mindful of where we have our dollars located. So what I'm specifically referring to, other than, of course, having dollars in the right account, is going to be related to withdrawing money. And I'm actually gonna have that as a point here later. But to give you a specific example, a lot of times folks have a lot of money market, a lot of cash sitting in, we'll call it an IRA or a 401k. When potentially speaking, it might be better to hold that in an account like your brokerage account, like your taxable account, just because of how these dollars are taxed when they come out. So I'll leave this conversation more so with your CPA or with your financial advisor, but just the location of where your assets at is going to be very important for being able to continue the quality of your portfolio and how you're going to have that grow over time. So now the 5th option again is something that is within your control, and that's retiring too early. Now, to be honest, I don't see too many people retire early. Normally when someone's in their mid 50s and they're looking at retirement, a lot of times they're very mindful of how much they have saved up, and they want to be mindful that if they do leave their job, it's going to be very difficult to re-enter the workforce, right? So that's always something to be very careful of if you are going to retire prior to your 60s. Another important note I always tell people if they're going to retire before their 60s is we really got to make sure we know where our healthcare plan is going to come from, because as you know, Medicare does not kick in until 65 years old, and the private health insurance space is very expensive. So that's something that I'd want you to consider as well. Mix that in with if I retired 50 years old, I might not have 3 decades to go, I might have 4. And if I read Peter Attia's book, I might have 5 decades to go. So something to be mindful of there. 6 is unexpected expenses from family support. Now, I've worked with a lot of athletes, and that comes to mind immediately because a lot of athletes, of course, like to care for their families, even extended families. But I'm sure more related to you is if you have a child who is getting married, you might want to help pay for their wedding. If you are retired and you want to help them buy a home, the housing market is a disaster right now for first-time home buyers. It's never been more difficult for the common person in their late 20s to buy a house. My wife and I bought a house a while back, and it was, of course, more difficult than it was, say, 10 years ago even. So just having things like these pop up, a lot of times, of course, parents love seeing the benefit of helping their children financially as they're growing up. But know that this, of course, can cause a risk to longevity as well. Let's move on to number 7. And if you remember earlier when I was at number 2, I said these two were related. Number 1, inflation, and number 7 are related. And number 7 is being too conservative or too risky with your retirement portfolio. So traditionally speaking, people are more conservative in retirement than they are prior to retirement. Okay, there's a number of theories I have on this. One being there's more time to watch the news, there's more time to read the paper, and you realize that the world is a crazy place, right? Whenever you're working, whenever at your 9 to 5, or if you're a business owner, whenever you're taking care of that, you don't have time to really follow what's going on in the world the same way that you do when you're retired. So if that is you, be mindful that it might make you a little more nervous about what's going on, and that's a very real thing. I just want you to make sure that you're on the right plan for you with your retirement portfolio, right? It's kind of like the first time you went skating. It's kind of difficult to find your balance at first, but if you've got a good financial advisor or if you've got a good investment manager, this is where they can really step in and be useful, not only from having the right allocation from a 60-40 or a 70-30 in terms of equities and bonds, but also getting you the income that you need in retirement, right? You can use your investments in retirement to help you pay dividends alongside Social Security, alongside a pension, alongside an annuity. So that's another thing to keep in mind here to help you with the longevity. The 8th piece, and this is again out of your control because it's related to interest rates and Social Security, but that is the uncertainty of Social Security payments and pensions. Now, if you are someone that still has a pension, I know it's really dwindling since about the late 80s, you know that interest rates are heavily tied to your pension, and you're very aware of that. So this is something that could impact your retirement long term. And then, of course, I know in another video I talked about this with Social Security. Just know that in the long-term future, Social Security might look different. That's not to say it will. I'd encourage you to watch that video if you have not. I kind of gave you the update on President Trump's plan with Social Security, but that's going to be the eighth thing. We are getting close to the end. We are at number 9, and that is poor spending and poor withdrawal plans in retirement. So, as I mentioned earlier, where you have your assets located is very important in retirement, and that is going to be directly connected to this one, because where you withdraw your money from plays a big factor in how quickly it's spent down because of how much the government taxes it, right? So there's a very successful financial advisor. His only punchline is, I keep people from getting hammered by the government with their taxes. Right, so the government is not here to help you pay less to them in retirement. In fact, I think the government would be much more happy if financial advisors that did tax planning did not exist, because they would be making a lot more revenue via taxes, which is their only way to add revenue, by the way. Be very mindful of this in retirement, right? And that's why I talk about the benefit of having that tax-free option in retirement. I'll plug this video here too, but just keep in mind that the way that you have your assets located and the way that you withdraw those assets is going to be crucial to pin down in retirement, maybe even more important than how your portfolio is allocated. Now, the 10th and final thing here is not having fluidity, not having a contingency plan in retirement. And let me explain what I mean here. And I know we're going pretty long to this. It's my longest video ever, so thanks for staying with me if you did. Not having contingency plan in retirement. What am I talking about here? So if you've ever heard of the 4% rule, if you've ever heard about the 3-bucket strategy, you know that these are very generic financial plans for retirees. I don't hate them. There's a reason why they're so popular, and there's a reason why they might serve as a good beginning point for a lot of retirees, but they're very generic and they're very rigid, I would say. So what I often think might be ideal, and of course this would require you to work with an advisor, is to have more fluidity in that plan. So in years that the market does well, maybe I can take a little more. In the years that the market does bad, maybe I hold off and I go into my cash reserves first before having to take when the market is down, right? So being able to have that flexibility in retirement is important. Again, I'll go back to my last point. It's very important where you have your assets, because if you've got multiple levers to pull from, if you got a tax-free lever, if you've got an after or pre-tax lever, and then you have a taxable brokerage account, those are all 3 taxed in different ways. So that's something to be mindful of when you go to withdraw your money in retirement, and that's very specific to this point here as well. So I know I'm 15 minutes coming up, so let me stop there. If you have any questions at all, here's my email. Would be more than happy to help you with your retirement plan. When I say retirement, this is for anyone in their 30s and 40s just as much as it's for people in their 60s. What I like to do is add clarity to folks. And a lot of times, like Peter Attia's book, like he explains, the earlier you start, the more potential you have. Same thing goes here, okay? So if this is something that you're thinking, no, I'm too young, this is not for me, absolutely not the case. So keep in mind that this is all for discussion with your financial advisor or a trained professional before implementing any of these tactics or before doing anything like this. But you can use this as a checklist, of course, for having that conversation, or if you just want to take a look at your own situation, of course, that would be helpful as well. So guys, thank you so much for your viewership. I know this was a long one. We'll see you next time. I'm grateful for you as always. Thanks.